Hey guys, this is Stephanie and I'm Stacks on Stacks on Stacks. Today I'm coming to you with one of my most fun videos of the year, and that is the best books that I read last year. Now I was going to do like a top 10, but I actually ended up grabbing like 19 best books, and that's pared down, which is actually a really great problem to have. 19 books that were just incredible last year. Like, I would have to say overall I had a really great reading year. I do have some books that are disappointing or worse. I'll talk about those in another video, but those did exist as well. But I had more books that I liked than I didn't like last year, which is really, really good. So I decided I was gonna do a top 5-ish, and then I'm going to have a bunch of honorable mentions. So I'm going to start with my honorable mentions, books that were one of the best that I read last year. Hopefully you'll agree with me with these, and hopefully you've read these because clearly I enjoyed them. First one I'm going to talk about is Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is a book that I just put off, and finally I read it during the Tome Infinity and Beyond readathon back in September, I think. And this is a sci-fi book. It takes place in outer space actually, and it's all these really interesting ways of like computer files and notes and stuff like that, and it's really great. I listened to some of it and I was having a hard time getting into it, and then when I actually read it, I found it incredible and I loved it, and I do want to continue on in this series this year. I don't think I mentioned that in my resolutions. I should have, because I definitely want to continue on with this series because I really, really enjoyed it. If you like sci-fi, you will like this. I also really did enjoy The Dazzling Heights by Catherine McGee. This is the second in the 1000th Floor trilogy. I just read the third one like 2 weeks ago, and it was a great conclusion, but the second one was great. It didn't have middle book syndrome. In the first book, very first thing, a murder happens, and then you're following these people who live in this tower. The higher up you live, the more money you have, the lower, the less. So we're following people that are on the 1000th floor and in the 900s, and then we're following people that are like on floor 36. So we have the whole gambit of characters, and I will say she writes characters well. She flushes them out. I enjoy her writing. I should probably read more by her, to be honest. But this was a great book that I read last year, and I almost forgot about it. And then I read the third one, and I was like, oh yes! It's a little sci-fi futuresque, but it's more of a whodunit set in a Gossip Girl style place. It's good. I also absolutely loved The Martian by Andy Weir. This is the first Andy Weir that I have read. Oh, I'm gonna choke on it, apparently. This book kept me laughing and entertained. I zipped through this. I think I read it in a day and a half or something like that, because it just made me laugh and smile and giggle. And if you have a good sense of humor, you will love this book. And it is another sci-fi. I read this one as well during the Tome Infinity and Beyond readathon, and I'm glad I did that readathon. It kind of pushed me to read books that I've been meaning to read, just hadn't done yet. 5 stars, loved it. It's great. One of the best of last year. I guess all these were one of the best of last year. I also loved My Plain Jane, and this is by Cynthia Hand Ashton-Brody and Jodi Meadows. This is like a retelling of Jane Eyre, which I read Jane Eyre so that this would make sense, and I hated Jane Eyre, which probably made me love this one even more. It's like Jane Eyre with like ghosts, and Jane can see ghosts and talk to them and communicate with them, and it explains things in the book. I'm like, why would she say that? Why would she do that? And you know, she was really like talking to a ghost, and I was like, that is so clever. You took all these things that I hated about this book and you made them make sense. Don't get me wrong, I still hate Jane Eyre, but this thing was fantastic. I also want to mention Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, which is the second book in the Six of Crows duology. I read this last February and I loved it. It actually made me want to go back and start the first book and just read through both of them really quick again. But I didn't, but I kind of wanted to. And now I heard they might be having a third one out. Maybe, I'm hoping. If they do, I will go back and read the first two because I loved them. Anybody who likes a heist or an action book, the only bad thing about these books is the characters are written like 17 years old, and in my brain they're like 31. Maybe that's because I'm older. I don't feel like they read like they're teenagers, but I kind of didn't care. I still love the book. And the last 3 honorable mentions I have are all World War II books. I kind of grouped them together, but they were all fantastic and I loved them. First one is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wen. This follows the story of 2 best friends who are British, and one of them is a pilot, the other is a passenger, and they crash land in France in 1943. And it is what happens, and it's beautiful, wonderful, heartbreaking. I don't want to tell you too much about it, but read it. You will love it, and I'm excited to read more by her as well. I also loved The Guernsey Literacy and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaefer and Annie Barrows. I don't think I ever say the name of this one right. There you can kind of see it. I loved this, and the Netflix movie was cute. The book was better, but the movie was so cute. This takes place just after World War II, but we kind of are looking back on World War II and what happened on an island called Guernsey that was occupied by German soldiers, and it's an island that is between France and England in that little English channel, I believe. It has romance, and it has sweetness, and it has sadness, and it was fantastic. And then I have The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Iturbi. And this one was another fantastic one. This actually takes place in the concentration camp of Auschwitz from a girl's perspective who is taking care of books for the people who are encamped there. Books were highly illegal and they were not allowed, and she would probably get killed if she was caught with those books. But she was willing to die to keep books and to show books and to educate these children there. And it's a pretty incredible book. I loved it. And if you like anything World War II, read it. You'll love it as well. My top 5, I cheated a little bit, and I'm going to talk about 4 Agatha Christie's that I read that were all fantastic. The first one is Endless Night, and I don't actually own it, but I loved it. It was absolutely great. Great Agatha Christie. I also enjoyed Sparkling Cider by Agatha Christie and Crooked House. I know I'm going through these quickly, but I can't tell you too much about Agatha Christie's. They're not very long, but they're really, really great. The last one, which I am putting on my top 5, is going to be Ordeal by Innocence by Agatha Christie. This one I read last month and I loved it. I read it and I literally want to turn over and read it again because I was like, I didn't see all the signs and I want to see the signs now, and I got super, super, super excited. If you like mysteries, if you're one of those people who's like, I like thrillers, I like mysteries, read some Agatha Christie. I know it's like a new thing with books with the woman who this and the girl who that in the title. She doesn't do that, but she's great, and I love her writing, and it makes me smile and it makes me happy because it's just so stinking good. This one particularly revolves around a family, and at the beginning of the book, the mother has been killed, and she was killed by her son, and the son is in prison, except that the son has just died in prison, and they found out he actually did not kill her, which means the killer is still in the house somewhere. Dun, dun, dun! I loved it. If you like mysteries, read it. You'll love it. It was one of the best books I had last year. Top 5, I would say. I am also going to talk about The Diviners by Libba Bray. I loaned out my other copy, but this one's beautiful anyway, so I kind of don't care. This is following a girl named Evie, 1920s in New York City. So it is supernatural as well. There are a lot of supernatural weird things going on, in addition to which Evie might have a few supernatural powers of her own. This is the first in, I think, a quartet. I will be continuing on with these books this year because I just loved it. Now, I might have loved it extra because this is a book that is so far out of the genre of what I normally read. And I was probably like, I don't know, 2/3 the way through it, and everybody's like, oh, it gets scary. It gets scary. And I'm like, I'm 2/3 the way through it. This isn't scary. And then I had to put it down, and I couldn't read it for a few days because I was busy with things and stuff, and I had bad dreams, and I had to pick it up and finish it because it was terrifying. But at the same time, I was like, oh my goodness, this book is so good. And I just loved it. It is my top 5 for the year. I want to read more. I love Libba Bray's writing. I like the way she makes characters flawed but likable, and I like the way she sets up the world that you feel immersed in it when you read that book. I felt like I was in New York City in the 20s, and it was exhilarating and terrifying, and who writes like that? Libba Bray, that's who. I am going to say that these top 5 books that I have this year, they are all writers that I think I would read anything they wrote, if that tells you anything. Coming in third for the third best book I read last year, I'm going to go with The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third book in the first Mistborn trilogy. I read it last January, and I think it left me thinking about it for like 3 or 4 months. One of the best wrap-ups to a book trilogy ever. It was so thorough. It was so good. And he talks about all those minute little details. I think some people don't like those details. I think some people are like, that's too much. I don't like that. I don't want it, da, 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 da. And to me, I'm like, yes, he remembered the necklace with the pearl in it, this, like all that kind of stuff. He doesn't forget a darn thing. It's probably why he does 75 edits and takes 4 years to get a book out, because they're amazeballs. I can't talk about this book because it is the third in a series, and what a great book it is. But the Mistborn trilogy as a whole is high fantasy, magic systems, there are fights, there is friendship, and then just the tiniest bit of romance on top, and it's great. It's a perfect blend of everything you could possibly want in a high fantasy book. My second best book of last year is actually a little bit of a cheat because I'm going to talk about all three of the Red Rising books by Pierce Brown. We have Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. I read all three of these last year and they were fantastic. People have been talking about these books for years. For years, people are like, oh my goodness, they're so great. But so many books get so hyped and then I'm just kind of like, yeah, it was okay. It was fine. And maybe at the time it was a great book, but by the time I read it, it was only an okay book. But these books were incredible. First book, I really did enjoy getting to know our main character, Darrow. This book starts on Mars, where there's a caste system where the Reds are at the bottom of the system. They're literally like miners down underneath in Mars. And then the Golds are on the top. They run everything, they have everything, they are everything. Just ask them. And in this, Darrow is kind of looking for vengeance and he wants to rise up and kind of show the Golds that they can't do this, that they can't be that way, but he has to be very smart about it. And there's so much political intrigue. If you like political intrigue, you will love these books. I would say there's sci-fi as well, to be honest, but these were great. It was kind of like a Hunger Games meets Ender's Game, but so much more. The second book, obviously, I can't talk about it a lot, but I will say it did not have middle book syndrome. A lot happened in this book, and at first, like the first 2 or 3 chapters, I felt like they undid all of this stuff they did in the first book just so they could have more plot. But they didn't do that. They undid a bunch of stuff and then they took it in a completely different direction, which was smart and good writing because then it is a book that does stand on its own 2 feet and it was fantastic. And it led to this last book, which might actually be one of the best endings to a book series that I have ever read in my life. I was so happy. I was reading it. I was crying. I was like, what? The Thing and no and and this and it was great. It left me fulfilled. And it wasn't even a perfect ending where all the good people live and all the bad people die. No, it was thought-provoking and it was enjoyable and heart-wrenching, but so satisfying. And it was probably the best series I read in a whole. It was definitely the best series I read last year, like series in a whole, start beginning last year. Might have been the only one, but it's definitely the best. And the best book that I read last year, if you were to ask me what's the best book you read, I would tell you it is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I read this in April last year and I was reeling for like months. Like I feel like most of the books that I read in May, I was like, Pugh! I didn't like them because they weren't Warbreaker. Because Light Song wasn't in them. Because Siri and Vivenna weren't there. Like I didn't like those books. I just wanted this one. This is, to me, a masterpiece. I loved it. If you were to read any of the books off this video, read this one. It is high fantasy. There is a magic system that has to do with breaths. You can breathe breaths to people. You can breathe breaths to objects. In addition to which, we have 2 princesses that are from one kingdom. And one of those princesses is getting married off to a kingdom, kind of an alliance between the 2 kingdoms. And she is going to be marrying the God King. Then we also have Light Song. He is a god as well, not as powerful as the God King, but he has some special powers and he has one of the most wonderful sense of humor I have ever seen, read. You know what I mean? It was great. He's probably one of my favorite characters I've ever read, especially from Brandon Sanderson, but maybe ever. He was amazing and fun. And this was the same thing. I got done with the book and I'm like, I want to read it again. Why can't I go back and read it again? I need to read it again because you need to read some more book stuff. So I didn't, but I might reread it this year at some point. I'm not really certain about that, but I might because I absolutely loved it. There were fights, there was love, there was magic, there was everything you could want in a book in this book, and I loved it. It was fantastic. For me, it was a perfect 5. So that was it. Those were the best books that I read in 2019. Now, you know what you're supposed to put down in the comments. What was the best book that you read in 2019? Because I pick from those comments and I try and read a lot of those books during the year. And sometimes I love them and sometimes I don't. But I always like to see other people's point of views and I always want to know what you guys have been reading. That is fantastic. Also, if you decide you're going to read any of these books that I talked about, please let me know down below if you do and your thoughts on those because I'm definitely interested in that as well. Don't forget to like and don't forget to subscribe. Please come back later because I usually post about 2 videos a week around here so you can catch me again soon. And stay tuned for my worst of the year, most disappointing, and most surprising. And I'll see you guys soon. Goodbye. Oh, you come downstairs to see Mommy. Oh. What was the best book you read last year, Centipede? Yeah. You're a good girl. I love you. You love them too? Goodbye.